Hello, and welcome to this video where we will be looking today at the concept of a qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. So let's begin with qualitative risk analysis. It starts with the basic formula that we have seen in the previous video, and that has to do with the risk equates to threat and the vulnerability, but it can have impact uh, in terms of how bad a threat be able to expose the vulnerability or to act upon it. We have seen that vulnerability is uh, equated to weakness, whether it's exploitable or not, it is still a weakness. And then there is a chance of the likelihood that a threat may act on that vulnerability. So that's the reason threat then in its own term can be equated with vulnerability as a multiplication of vulnerability with impact and the likelihood. Total risk in that case that equates to threat, vulnerability, and then what is the asset value? What is of the value to your business which is at stake? Now we do apply countermeasures to balance out the risk, and that's why at times it may so happen that even after applying the countermeasures, you may have a residual risk left out, which means the risk has not totally eliminated, but it is well within the risk appetite or the risk tolerance level that you have set. Now, for the qualitative risk analysis, it is also important to know that defining how bad it is, how worse it may go, is a very subjective concept or definition. For example, you may say that if we end up losing lots of business due to due to a particular vulnerability being exploited by a threat, then we are at risk. But then, how do you define what is lot of business? One of the ways that you can do that is by building what you called as a risk analysis matrix, where you can define parameters of likelihood and impact, and then try to map the the business risk that you have by a threat being exploiting the vulnerability on this particular risk matrix. You can have your likelihood and impact into categories. A combination of which will then give you whether you are having a low risk or a medium risk or a high or the critical. Now, it also depends that you look at this matrix quite carefully because, for example, something which is of low likelihood may end up having a high impact, and that in that case should be treated as critical. Consider the case of the attack on 9/11, which was a very low likelihood scenario, but when it happened, the impact was quite huge. So it is important that for the risk analysis matrices, your concept about likelihood and especially about impact should be very, very clear. So the qualitative risk analysis is with respect to quality of it, which means the concept is not completely black and white, it's vague, and you have to deal with terms like good, a lot, pretty good, pretty bad, and things like that. On the other hand, if you then look at quantitative risk analysis, the idea became quite solid because there you are talking in terms of very specific numbers, which will be very easy to understand. However, to do the quantitative risk analysis, there are certain terms that you have to be absolutely clear about, and this is a very highly testable concept in the exam. So to begin with, we start with what is an asset value, what is at stake, what does it has a value to your business. For example, if you are running a marketing website, what value does it have that the server which runs your marketing portal carries? Then, what is an exposure factor? For example, what if there has to be an attack happened? What is the percentage of asset that you may end up losing? It could be that you may end up losing 20-30% of the processing capability. That means probably your marketing website might be running 20 to 30% slower or at low capacity considered to when it is running on the full capacity. What is a single loss expectancy? What you do here is that you try to estimate what does it cost if it happens, if an attack has happened once, and based on my exposure factor and my asset value, what is the loss that I am expecting? So that is the single loss expectancy. Now, it may so happen that event is occurring repeatedly. That means it is not just happening once a time, but it may have frequency. That's where the concept of annual rate of occurrence, how often does this happen each year, comes into picture. Now, based on the annual rate of occurrence, you can then estimate what is known as the annualized loss expectancy, and that is it costs you per year if you do nothing in terms of that actual threat event, which is based on certain exposure factor and based on your asset value that it has entailed. So therefore, annualized loss expectancy is calculated as a product of SLE, a single loss expectancy multiplied by annual rate of occurrence. Therefore, now with this number, you can also calculate what is your total cost of ownership for a particular asset. You have an asset, but you have to apply some risk mitigation control upfront, plus there could be an ongoing control, for example, the regular maintenance of your marketing website and the server, patching and whatnot, which can be considered as a normal operational cost. Therefore, the total cost of ownership is the sum total of all these factors combined together. It is important that you understand each of this concept and the definition of what does it entail for your exam. It could also mean that during the exam, you may have to manually calculate some of the values. So pay very great attention to the wordings of the question. For example, if the annual rate of occurrence has been marked as happening twice a year or once every quarter, then you know once every quarter means 4 times a year. And this is very important that you pay attention to the wordings as used in the question. So let's stop here. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much.